A very good evening and welcome to The Bottom Line, a wrap of the business news of the day. And tonight we look at an explosive new report on pension money in South Africa, specifically unclaimed funds that could help millions of poor people. It will be released by advocacy group Open Secrets tomorrow, but we can bring you this exclusive early report tonight. So let's begin with the number of the day, 42 billion rand. 42 billion at least. Now, that is the figure put forward by Open Secrets after a year-long investigation. That is the amount, it says, of unpaid pension funds and other benefits that is owed to over 4 million South Africans, many of them needy and poor. There was an attempt at some stage to find beneficiaries, but Open Secrets says it's all been handled very badly. In fact, it says their report with the same name as this show segment, The Bottom Line, shows that private companies that administer pension funds are actually benefiting from sitting on the funds and profiting from them. And the state has failed to stop them. The Financial Services Board, or FSB, oversaw a cancellation project when it was the state regulator of pension funds between 2007 and 2013. It has since been replaced by the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the FSCA. Well, the report opens with portraits of individuals and families who are living in poverty and struggling to access the pension benefits owed to them. To discuss, let's go to C Point now. We're joined by Michael Marchant from Open Secrets, who is the lead investigator on this report. Michael, thank you very much. You started showing this report, showing a dompas or an old pass on the cover. Tell me about that first.
Good evening, Francis. So we interviewed a range of pensioners and pension fund members, both in Gauteng and in Cape Town, as part of our investigation. And one of the things that really struck us so hard during this investigation is how many, particularly elderly pensioners, rely on their old apartheid-era passbook, or what was called the dompas, to try and prove where they worked and at what times. And the reason that they're having to do this is that so many people, both in South Africa and in some of the neighboring countries, worked in South Africa for decades, had money taken out of their salary towards a pension fund, and yet they have never been paid. And now what many of those pensioners are having to do is go to pension fund administrators like Liberty and Alexander Forbes, as well as the government and the regulator, and they're being asked to try and prove where they worked at various times, and are having to go back to this really terrible document, a symbol of all the oppression of the apartheid era, to try and prove where they worked. And I think what we've found with Open Secrets is that the treatment of pensioners today as part of this project really, for many of those people, is a continuation of a system that has marginalized them, disenfranchised them, and disempowered them.
So we're bringing up some of the faces, Michael, of the people who can't categorically prove, but they may be owed pension funds. Just tell us about people like Maria Mashiane, or some of the stories that you've heard. And I mean, how do they lose these benefits or lose track of them in the first place?
So it's a multifaceted problem, Francis, and I think the first thing that we need to acknowledge is that employers also have a role to play in this story. Employers are responsible for giving the pension fund administrators correct information and of feeding information back to their employees about the pension fund that they belong to. And what has happened is that over time, that information has not been kept up to date. And what has often happened is then employers have changed, perhaps they've been bought out by another company, or they simply don't exist anymore, and the employee who might have become a pensioner now really has no one to go back to. And I think that really took us then to the next point, is that where is then the regulator in that situation? Because if the pension fund administrators still sit on all of that money, they can charge fees on them. And so you end up with many millions of people who might not know precisely where to go or the precise name of their fund, but who know that they've had deductions off their salary for decades. And you'd expect, and I think we would demand in that situation, that the regulator would take a hard line with the pension fund administrators, require them to more actively trace those beneficiaries where they can, and to ensure that those pensions are preserved and not abused and not eroded through fees. Yeah. And what we've seen is we haven't seen that urgency from the regulator, from the FSB, which is now the FSCA.
So explain more what you're claiming, because it's not only fees. Surely they can earn interest. Where does that interest go? And a few years ago, there were radio ads calling for people who may have funds in pension funds to come forward and claim. But it sounds like you're saying there was no concerted effort. And two companies come up, Liberty and Alexander Forbes.
So that I think that it might be most helpful to split this into two stories here. The one is the number that you led with at the beginning of the show, which is 42 billion rand. And to be clear with everyone, that money sits in specified unclaimed benefit funds that companies like Alexander Forbes, Liberty, and others administer. They also still sit in many active different pension funds, and they sit between the private sector and government. And so that is an industry-wide problem, that 42 billion. But what we found when we really dug down into this industry and what's been happening over the last 10 years is an additional problem that particularly Liberty is at the center of, which was over a period of 7 years between 2007 and 2013, between the fund administrators and the FSCA, they in fact cancelled nearly 7,000 pension funds. And what our investigation shows is that in at least hundreds of those cases, those pension funds were cancelled in error. That the trustees who were appointed, who worked at places like Liberty and Alexander Forbes, went to the regulator and said to them, don't worry, there's no more money left in this fund and there are no more people owed. And what emerged years later, when whistleblowers both within Liberty and at the regulator blew the whistle, is that in hundreds of cases, that was not the case. And what had happened is that money might have been left in an initial investment fund, earning fees for the asset manager, as you say, but the pension fund itself was left in a state of limbo, because when it was deregistered, it could no longer trace and it could no longer pay its beneficiaries.
So let's just clarify, because this would be a serious claim. Are you saying these private companies like Liberty and Alexander Forbes not making really an effort because they want to profit from not paying out the beneficiaries?
Well, I think what we can say for sure that we know, and this is partly because in particular Liberty has admitted this, is that for a period of several years, they systematically made incorrect representations to the administrator about the status of pension funds. Now, Liberty's explanation of this, for example, is that their record keeping is simply poor, that they have mistakes in their asset registers, that they weren't able to work out which funds had which money. But the problem is for them is that the law requires administrators who can make money off this type of business to, for example, keep proper records, exercise absolute due diligence, and exercise the utmost care when they are the custodians of other people's money. And so by making those systemic mistakes for so many years, we are arguing that they were at that time in contravention of the law. In addition to that, we have several whistleblowers from within the industry, and I think that this has been publicly claimed as well, is that in various places that these companies make a huge amount of their money off the back of fees. And a company like Liberty, in fact, went so far as to buy a whole range of pension fund administration business in the early 2000s on the basis that they thought that it was a good business model. And so what we don't have is we don't have a memorandum from within the company that says, let's cancel the funds to keep our hands on the money. But we have extensive evidence that their conduct was unlawful and that this industry profits on having assets under management and on keeping a huge amount of money under its control and administration.
All right, so the regulator now is the FSCA. What exactly do you want from them? I mean, is there a chance that this could all be reversed, that a lot of these people could actually get these funds, Michael?
So that is still entirely possible. And I think the number one thing that we have demanded and have had some success with so far is to get the FSCA to instruct the pension fund administrators to go to court and reinstate those funds urgently so that they may be paid. Liberty had indicated more than a year ago that they would go to court to reinstate 105 funds that they realized that they'd cancelled in error. They then slowed down on that process, and we continue to apply pressure on them to go to court as soon as is possible. So reinstating those funds and paying pensioners is absolutely the first goal, and it's something that we think the FSCA needs to prioritize. But the second thing I think that we want to say is that even if this process is reversible, which we believe it is, and even though some of those things can be rectified, the fact that these errors took place for so many years and have been left untouched for so many years really begs the question as to the leadership at the FSB at the time, many of which will remain at the FSCA, whether they are the best people to lead what is supposed to be a regulator of financial corporations into the future. And second of all, why the FSCA have acknowledged to Open Secrets that they have at this point never undertaken any investigation into how companies like Liberty and Alexander Forbes could give them such erroneous, incorrect information in so many cases. And so I think we would also demand accountability both for the corporations, but also within the regulator to really account for how this mistake could have happened for so long.
All right, some serious claims, very worrying, and we will give them a chance to respond if they want to. But thank you for outlining your report. The bottom line, 42 billion rand, Open Secrets says, is owed to around 4 million South Africans. That was Michael Marchant from Open Secrets leading the investigation into unpaid pension funds.